Is it the mustache? Who knows?
What's up YouTube? The Magic Misadventures expansion is about to be released, and today's video is going to be about 3 deck ideas that contain all of the new champions as well as plenty of the new cards. And my idea here was to find 3 decks that are somewhat competitive, that can actually help you climb in the ladder while also trying all of this fun new stuff. Now I'm gonna be doing the deck overviews in the deck building tool of runeterra.ccg.com. They do feature all of the new cards, and as long as they're not in the actual game yet, this is gonna be a great place where you can theory craft your builds, save your decks and share them. And I will also write guides about all 3 of these decks if you need to read some more in-depth strategy or need to remember why some cards are in there or what the general idea of this deck is. At the time of the recording, I didn't write the guides yet. I'll do that right after the recording. Anyway, let's get into the decks, and we'll start off with the Rumble deck from Bandle City, which I believe to be the strongest out of these new 3 decks that I'm going to present. And I'm basically trying to combine 3 things into a mid-range deck. So we have the Rumble and Mecha-Yordle package for some real mid-game presence and a power spike. We also have a Yordle package though, around Yordle Explorer, Squire, Electro-Yordle, and these other Yordles that summon Mecha-Yordles. And we have the good old discard package from Noxus. We have Draven and a bunch of other stuff. So I'll try to talk you guys card through card why everything is in there. Now let me start off by saying that we run a total of 18 cards that require you to discard something. And I think then a lot of the deck choices will immediately make a lot more sense. We also run a total of 16 cards that generate discard fodder. Some cards like Draven can generate discardable cards multiple times, the access, or lecturing Yorlde with the poison darts. And that's why I'm not quite sure about the balance yet about discard cards ratio to discard fodder, but it does feel like a good starting point. To ensure that we get this discard fodder very consistently, we run some Draven's biggest fans. Draven will be pretty core to our deck strategy by generating that discard fodder, forcing removal, and also just being a good offensive unit, and therefore having him consistently is definitely worth it. Reborn Grenadier is a card I'm not quite sure yet about. I don't think it really nails the strategy of this deck because we're not really running a burn aggro deck, and the only way to get this out as a burst speed blocker is through Scrapheap. Or of course Draven Axis, but we mostly want to use Draven's Axis as discard fodder. And therefore, right now I'm sticking on 1 Reborn Grenadier just for some optionality. Yordle Squire is a card that I didn't include in the original draft, but after thinking about it for a while, it makes so much sense, because I also wanted to run Yordle Explorers, so there is additional value in running more Yordles in the deck, while at the same time I was also looking for cards that generate additional discard fodder, and at the same time looking for other 1-drops, because we literally only have Draven's biggest fan as the turn 1 play as of right now. And what I also like about the Squire is the optionality, because the tiny shield might come in handy in quite a few matchups. For example, to give this Yordle Explorer 1 extra HP, or to give your quick attackers like Rumble or Draven some extra attack, or the elusive Mecha-Yordle that you pull, anything like that. Moving on, I'll just say Fallen Rider and Lost Soul are no-brainers, auto-include 3-offs in any type of aggressive discard deck. Grave Physician is in here, our only real tool of drawing, but a very effective one. And I think with the inclusion of all of those Mecha-Yordle manifests, we should not really run out of value. So Yordle Explorer is one that I also didn't really see at first sight, but I think it could be really good in this deck, considering that we do run a total of 13 other Yordle cards in the deck, as well as the 2 other Yordle Explorers, so 15 other Yordles in the main deck. And Mecha-Yordles, as far as I know, a developer posted that Mecha-Yordles will also count as Yordles and therefore also receive the Explorer buff, and that makes another 9 Yordles that can potentially get that +1/+1. And for a board-driven mid-range strategy like we're playing it, this should be very valuable, this should be very good. And we can additionally protect the Yordle Explorer with a tiny shield from Squire. And because of this Yordle synergy and the nice curve, I decided to play Bilge Rat Rascal in this one instead of Squeaker. And besides that, we also have Arena Promoter, also Yordle, a 4-mana potential 5/4 tough is already pretty scary, but of course it also manifests a discounted Mecha-Yordle, very powerful in this. Now, Lecturing Yordle is also a card I'm not 100% sure about yet. I would like to run more copies of it, but there are already a lot of 4-drops in our deck. Keep in mind that Lost Soul will usually get discarded and will also be a 4-mana Twinblade Revenant in our hand, so we already have a total of 9 cards without Lecturing Yorlde. But it is, of course, super synergistic in this deck. It generates potential discard fodder or removal, it has a crazy stat line, and it has the Yordle tag. So I might tweak some ratios there in the future, I'm not sure about it yet. Now, looking at the spells, Scrapheap, I don't think that needs any explanation. It also synergizes very well with survival skills to have some additional burst speed option of discarding something in our hand. Speaking of survival skills, mainly there to protect our engines, which are Rumble and Draven, to get additional hits in, to get that Rumble level up, or of course keep some Mecha-Yordles alive. Electro Harpoon should be one of the better cards in this deck, our only very effective form of removal while at the same time damaging our opponent's Nexus. We play an aggressive deck, just makes perfect sense. And a card that I want to try out as a 1-off or 2-off is Shampoo. We should usually be able to snowball the board in the early to mid game, and we don't want the game to drag on for too long and give our opponent time to stabilize. I think some Shampoo rally effect as a 1-off or 2-off might make a lot of sense in this deck. So this deck looks very strong to me on paper. I mentioned some tech considerations right away. If you want to make this deck more aggressive, something like Decimate might make sense, or just generally playing a lower curve, or maybe even more rallies. Or we can make this a bit more mid-range value driven if we play more hidden pathways. I'm not quite sure if this deck is going to tend to run out of steam. I don't think so, because we play Grey Physician and we also manifest a lot of cards in hand, right? So I would say this deck does look pretty well-rounded at first sight, and should be one of the better options to climb with if you want to try the new cards. Moving on, Pantheon is up next, and I'm trying to combine Pantheon with all of the Demacia synergies that we have, as well as the Dragon synergies of Wounded Whiteflame. So this is a mixture Fated and Dragon deck. Now I will say right away, Pantheon can be tried in a lot of different decks, like Pantheon Akshan, Pantheon Riven, Pantheon Shadow Isles might make sense. But I'm trying to give you guys good decks for the first day and stuff you can actually climb with, and I do believe that this one might end up being the strongest. I'll just take you through the list first, talk about the game plan, and then mention some considerations to tweak the list in a different direction. So first of all, let's start on curve. We play Dragon Show because we want to take advantage of the insane synergy with Wounded Whiteflame. If we play Wounded Whiteflame, the Dragon Show gets struck for 2 damage only, which means it survives, draws you a card, and you can use that effect later on again. So ideally, Dragon Show is going to be a 1-mana draw 2, or while at the same time being an optional blocker, while also giving one of your Dragon's Fury. Should be absolutely insane in this deck. We play Saga Seeker as the other 1-drop with the potential to keep on growing due to his Fated keyword. I'm not 100% sure yet if this is actually going to be better than Fleet Feather Tracker, but it is a new card. We do have a lot of synergies. Let's try it out. Brightsteel Protector is going to be one of the enablers to really make Saga Seeker pay off, because it can activate the Fated keyword without losing tempo at all by targeting your units. And of course, the synergies with the challenger units are quite evident, like Dragon Guard Lieutenant as well as Screeching Dragon. Speaking of Dragon Guard Lieutenant, we do main deck 9 dragons. We also play 2 Dragon's Clutches to draw some, so it should be pretty easy to activate the challenger here. Just a solid card, 2 mana 3/2 challenger. Mountain Goat as well, good stat line, aggressive stat line, but the gem is the key part here, because that's a very mana efficient way to proc the Fated keyword on Pantheon or the Wounded Whiteflame while also regenerating it, or the Saga Seeker. I think Whiteflame needs no explanation. I dare say that just in a vacuum, this might be the best card of the new expansion. It's just, even though it doesn't have a crazy effect, it's just straight up overstatted and over-keyworded, and the Dragon Show synergy is extra cute. Screeching Dragon, kind of a must in any mid-range deck, especially dragon-driven. We play some combo tricks, we make plenty of use of the Fury keyword. Looks like a no-brainer. And we pair all of these followers with our champions. Shyvana shouldn't be too hard to level here. We play plenty of dragons. We have Dragon Chows to have our dragons deal damage, and we play a couple of strike effects. Now, Pantheon is mostly a finisher in this, but sometimes we do want to get him onto the board fairly early to stack up that Fated keyword and make him grow and grow. And in order to do so, we do play plenty of protective options. We play 3 Sharp Sights just because it's a super good combat trick. We play Pale Cascades. I'm not sure about the exact number there yet, but effective combat trick while also drawing your card, making sure you don't run out of steam. We Stand Together is also one that I can't really gauge until I have tried it. Should be solid, also a good way to procking Fated onto different units, and it might be worth running more copies of this card just as a great defensive option. Single combat also a great way of making use of the Fated keyword and activating it, while at the same time enabling our Fury effects, being effective removal, as well as potentially making use of the barriers of Pantheon or Brightsteel Protector or Golden Aegis even. And since we do play a mid-range deck that tries to snowball the board, Golden Aegis is going to be one of our better finishers. On the first attack, we try to remove all the jump blockers. On the second attack, we just hit the Nexus. And the other option for a finisher I already mentioned is Dragon's Clutch. This card, of course, is great in any dragon deck, being arguably the strongest finisher for dragons, while also, if you run out of steam, you can always go for that draw. So the deck is fairly straightforward, should not be that hard to play, might be a great option, especially for the less experienced players who want to play Pantheon and the new cards. Some worries I have with this deck, though, is that this might run out of value. We don't play any super expensive cards, so I was considering maybe tacking in some Eclipse Dragons, maybe cutting 1 Shyvana for an Aurelion Sol, maybe adding in some Concerted Strikes, just some higher value cards. But as of right now, my assumption is that the meta will be very fast. The first couple of days, people usually always try to just climb quickly and therefore resort to a lot of aggro decks, or they try the new cards. But most of the new cards are very aggressive and will be played in aggro or mid-range strategies, and therefore I don't think we need to greed too much value. And yeah, I'll mention all of those tech choices and write down some more tech ideas in the article. But now moving on to our last deck, which covers 2 of the new champions. This one will combine Ahri and Kennen. I just think they're such a good natural fit, both benefiting greatly from recall effects, that I don't think it makes sense separating them. I'm still trying to give you strong decks, right? So we could of course pair them with Yasuo, but it's probably not going to be a great option for climbing. And my idea with Kennen Ahri here was to go for an Allegiance deck to really make benefit of Kinku Wayfinder. So the core idea of this deck is to swarm your opponent with elusives while making use of a lot of recall synergies. The big payoffs for having a lot of elusives are either a leveled up Ahri, which of course then can strike the Nexus a lot of times instead of the elusives, but also cards like Greenglade Duo that grow greatly by summoning a lot of cheap units next to them. At the same time, I dare say this might be the first time that Keeper of Masks might become somewhat playable in the meta. This is going to be a very good and solid mana-efficient finishing option, making that wide board of elusives much stronger, and maybe even being able to play it multiple times over in one round with all of those recall synergies. Now, you might of course ask yourself, how does this deck survive long enough? The idea here is that we do play plenty of retreats, recalls, basically recall spells that allow you to phantom block your opponent, which means declare the block, recall your unit on the stack, which means you do get it back to hand, you can replay it again, but of course your opponent's attack gets stopped. So looking at this deck, we have a lot of very, very strong turn 1 plays. Dancing Droplet, of course, will make sure that you don't really run out of steam. The same can be said for the Mourned. It's a very easy way to level up your Ahri and Kennen without having to invest a lot of cards. And Kennen, of course, is already very good as a 1-mana 2/1 quick attacker in the early game, but of course also benefits from either being summoned through the Wayfinder or being recalled a couple of times by getting more Mark of the Storms. Now, I already mentioned Greenglade Duo, probably doesn't need explanation here. Gust Monk is the only non-allegiance card, and I do think it's going to be quite key for this one, because the card that it generates, Cloud Stance, can be used in a lot of different ways. We can either push some important Nexus damage, we can use it to activate recall effects, or we can use it as a combat trick. We can also use it onto Ahri to make use of that attack buff multiple times, whether she's unleveled or leveled. And of course, recalling Gust Monk, we also get more access to those Cloud Stances to not really run out of steam. Keeper of Masks, I already explained. It's meant more as a finisher or a combo piece, but at the same time, it's one of the few units that we're actually fine to block with, to stall the game, to stop our opponent, and buy us more time to finish them with the elusives. Navori Conspirator, just a great enabler for a lot of recall strategies. Any 1-drop we play into Navori Conspirator is going to be quite cute. Shadow Assassins there to push damage and to make sure we don't run out of steam by drawing. It's also a great target for return after you cast Retreat. Just a very mana efficient summon. And the core piece of this deck is definitely Kinku Wayfinder. It should be pretty insane because of how good all of these one-drop options that we can get are, especially if we summon multiple cannons. And then at the same time, that might make Greenglade Duo grow. At the same time, Keeper of Masks being played after the Wayfinder is pretty insane. And we have plenty of ways to recall the Kinku Wayfinder and make use of them multiple times. One card I'm not sure about yet, but I want to try out is Sai'nen Thousand-Tailed. Another option to not really run out of steam, and another kind of Keeper of Masks effect. Just because it's so expensive, I'm not sure if we really want it in the deck. Another more experimental card here is God-Willow Seedling, but it is very, very flexible in this deck and can be very useful depending on our current needs. Because if we try to push for lethal damage, maybe we put it on Keeper of Masks to get some more wide attack buffs. If we need to draw, we put it on Shadow Assassin or Sai'nen Thousand-Tailed. If we need to build up a board again, we can put it on Kinku Wayfinder. And if we want to generate a million marks of the storm, we can of course also put it on Kennen, especially if he's leveled. Now for spells, there are a lot of good choices. I went with Twin Disciplines for sure. It has to be a 3-of. Because my deck is so recall aggressive, I do like retreats and recalls. I did not go for any Nopifies, because the only scenario where Nopify is really significantly better is if Greenglade Duo attacks and our opponent tries to remove it. Nopify, of course, would ensure that the Nexus hit still goes through, but in most other cases, especially in this deck, recall effects are just more flexible. Not only because of all of the synergies on the cards themselves, but also because we can use it as a defensive option to phantom block our opponent's attackers. And some cards that are definitely also worth considering are cards like Homecoming. Could be pretty good, but I feel like it might be too slow. Concussive Palm, we can recall that a million times, reuse the stun over and over. And then we can consider Windfarer Hatchling as another finishing option. We could consider more Navori Blade Scouts as a more aggressive option. It's really hard to gauge this deck without having tried it, so I'll definitely keep an open mind. I would suggest you to do the same and be flexible with trying out some different tag options and swapping stuff out. And another idea I had around this deck, I just show you guys really quick, would be a non-allegiance version of this, but I'm honestly not really sure if it's going to be worth it, because I do think Kinku Wayfinder is going to be pretty sick in that list. But if we go for a non-allegiance version, we have the added benefit of being able to play cards like Tornado Warrior, to play cards like Lightning Rush. Maybe Quicken makes sense in this one. And cards like Conchologist might also make sense, just some solid all-around Bandle City cards. The version I built here makes this whole archetype a bit more mid-rangey. We use stuff like Charm to also make use of the quick attacks of our champions as removal. Could even tag in Sonic Waves. And we play a bit more Sai'nen, a bit more God-Willow Seedling, to not run out of steam and to get some sick combos going. But overall, my gut instinct is that this Allegiance version should perform a bit better. Now that's it for these deck suggestions. Keep in mind that I try to pick decks that are actually somewhat strong, and therefore I didn't go absolutely crazy on the experimentation yet. But I will definitely do that once the patch comes out. I do encourage you to do so as well, to maybe find the next broken decks. But these lists should be some good starting points to hit the ladder with. Don't forget, I will be writing some more in-depth guides about all of these decks. I will link that article in the description as well as the comments. And there I will also mention which other cards might be worth to try out if the decks struggle with something specific, for example, running out of steam too often. And I hope these decks could give you some inspiration. I can't wait to try them out myself. And I hope you can enjoy the Magic Misadventures expansion.